Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the United States Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, where we're doing a series of interviews to talk about the challenges facing the United States Navy, the United States, and its allies. And it's an honor to talk to the man who is the head of the Wargaming department here at the Naval War College. Last time we met was in the great room itself where Wargaming was happening. Retired United States Navy Captain Richard Twig LaBranche, who has been heading the program here now for almost 2 years.
Yes, that's exactly right. 2 years. It goes by really fast.
It does go by really fast. You were just retiring, in the process of retiring the last time we spoke. Carrier aviator flying F-18s, but also somebody who's taught here before on the faculty on joint military operations. So, Twig, I want to ask you. You know, there's been a huge focus on wargaming over the last many years to try to step up our game. What are some of the things that you've been doing in terms of improving wargaming, improving the fidelity, so that the product you're getting, whether it's for commanders, but then is distilled down to the tactical level to folks like you know, who were on those flight decks and on the deck plates, you know, is useful for them in gaining insight about potential adversaries and how they'll act?
Right. Because I was a naval aviator and been out on the front lines, I take this seriously, and I want to make sure that we at the Wargaming department give actionable data information to commanders, so that they can actually make a difference in their decision making, so that we can save lives, right? And so what we have done to up our game is we have changed the nature, the classifications of our games. So there was a time where people would say in DC, I never made a decision on a procurement off a war game. They're all unclassified, and they don't know all the things we know. Well, now we do almost all of our games at the TSSCI level, okay? And we inform it with information, you know, special programs as well. And so they can't make that statement anymore. And because we are a very large wargaming facility, we have a lot of people who do research on capabilities. So it's not just what does Red have, whoever Red is. What do they have? How good are they with those tools? How would they aggregate those forces in the air, IADS, and, you know, integrated air defense systems, ships, subs? How good are they at that along the lines of maritime warfare? And so we study that. And then we go to like a fleet commander, where the fleet commander calls us with a pack fleet, 6th fleet, 5th fleet, and says, hey, I think my problem is X. I would like to study X. And we say, okay, we'll come over there and we talk to them about what their problem is. And it's almost, I want to give you an anatomical example. You go in to the doctor and your fingers are tingling. And so you think the doctor is going to, you know, do something with your fingers. It's actually a pinched nerve. So we really have to get at the nature of the problem. What is the tasking that you're really asking for? And so once we have that, once we frame the problem, then we go into all the research and lit reviews and up our game to the point where we know the latest and greatest, because the environment is changing. And I can tell you that I think that, in my opinion, that there are many, and all this is my opinion, by the way, that there are many decision makers within the Navy, within the government, that look at our peer adversary. They call it near peer. I say it's peer. Our peer adversary 20 years ago. Now I juxtapose what Red looked like 20 years ago versus what they look like today, which is what they say they're going to look like in 2025, and we haven't changed a lot. And that makes the problem harder. So what we do is we do everything at the TSSCI level, pretty much. We exercise certain concepts for commanders, and we give them the results. And I can't emphasize enough about not just using, you know, real plans, real ideas that the commanders themselves are thinking, but when the commanders themselves play the games, the legitimacy of the outcome, especially if it's done at the TSSCI level, is far greater than if you had a bunch of students doing it. Right. Because their war games can serve two purposes, from my perspective, at the operational level of war. They serve to educate. So if you have people that don't understand that don't understand maritime warfare in the aggregate, they say, okay, I know air, but they don't know how air ties with ships. And they may use, and I'll use something that totally out of whack here. Let's say our students want to employ tanks, and they think those tanks can fly. And so they come up with a plan where tanks fly. Well, we know tanks don't fly. I mean, I know that sounds elementary, but and it's not as simplistic as that. But the idea of a game for students is so students get an experiential it's active learning process. They remember it because they did it. They were there, and it's not like they just read a book and they were sleeping half the time. They actually had to do something, and that sticks with them. And so it's not the outcome that we care so much about. It's that they learned how to aggregate forces, what the American environment looks like, how they should think about that environment, how they should think about this adversary or that adversary. Those are the types of things. Now, from a wargaming perspective for commanders, who plays the game could not be more important. If you're looking for informational type of thing, gaps and seams in your plans, I tell you, deficiencies in instruments of war, if we're using 60s technology missiles and the adversary is using today's technology, if we're using 70s technology missiles, I mean, those things reveal themselves. If they have a reach of a couple thousand miles and we have a reach of 50 miles, I think that's pretty difficult to overcome. So we find all these gaps and seams. Now, and also we used to just give the information to the sponsor, who used to be the commander actual, because they would come here and play themselves. But now we also consider, and it was always the CNO was actually the sponsor, he's the boss. But we provide the CNO his cut of the game from a man trained and equipped standpoint. So we give the commander, this is what we think. These are the big things we learned, the themes that came out of the game. And then we look to the CNO and say, sir, basically through his OpNav staff, we say, this is what we think you should focus on. So when I look at things from an instrument of war standpoint, I mean, tactical reach, right? I mean, if I've got a 12-foot arm and you've got a 2-foot arm, you have a problem because I'm going to be reaching you before you can reach me. It's not as simple as that, but that's an important factor. Air, undersea, sea, those things matter. Survivability. If I have to shoot 14 at you or 20 at you to hit something because they don't discriminate, that's a problem. It's a logistics problem for one thing. You become a feat much quicker if you have 96 in your tubes or whatever you have, and you have to shoot 14, that's a problem, especially if you're going after a competitor in their backyard and they have lots of stuff. And they have to discriminate. If I need to hit a high-value target, I need to hit the high-value target, not something that happens to swing in the way, because that's not by itself. Right. So characteristics of things matter, okay? And which makes it different than a tactical war game or model and simulation, because you can forget something in a model and simulation. If you do a model and simulation and you say, and it's algorithmic, right? And you put all these quotients in, but you forgot an IAD that goes 2,000 miles, or you forgot an IAD that can reach out and touch you at 1,000 miles, that changes your game plan, because you thought you could operate in a certain area, and now you cannot. But you're proffering this information as if this is truth, because it's quantitative. And what I've learned over the years is the real value in thinking, the real value is derived, from my perspective, in the qualitative data, right? The decision making. Because there's so many variables, you're never going to get them all. There's billions of variables. How do you get them all? But when you do an operational level war game with the commanders, with their ideas, with the commanders, task force commanders, and everyone has to make decisions because there's a thinking adversary, the best our country has, whether it's DIA, CIA, Red, whoever country, whoever Red is in this game, we have the best and the brightest actively trying to repel blue. And that's a big deal. And so you say, okay, that's one data point, and it is. But if you've been doing this over a period of a decade, then and you put a scattergram up there and you say these outcomes look like this, and you have hundreds, if not thousands, of people looking at this stuff, the best people that they do this every day, then I think you have indications where, okay, this is my findings. I've done the analysis, so this is my findings. I'm going to connect all these findings, and I'm going to draw conclusions as a subject matter expert. And if these conclusions are correct, I recommend X. This is what we're doing in the wargaming department. There's a lot of bluster about iterative gaming, and I think it's very important. Iterative gaming is important, but what is iterative gaming is the question. Like, if I do the same game over and over and over again, and I got variables wrong, I'm Einstein's definition of insanity, okay? I'm expecting a different outcome. Right. But if I spend time thinking about the problem from a different way, it's the same problem, from a different way, and I still get a similar outcome, then there's some legitimacy to those outcomes over time. Am I explaining myself?
Yes, you are. Let me ask you this question. Our adversaries are working very, very hard to confront us with a whole series of situations that are very, very different than we anticipate. We have a tendency of thinking of sort of the decisive battle, right? The battle of consequence. And yet, our adversaries, particularly in China's case, are working very, very hard to make sure that they don't get to that they advance their interests short of that a destroyer captain will be confronted with hundreds, if not thousands, of fishing boats, for example, from the unofficial and official militias. And that'll be backed up with a fisheries protection vessel, which then responds to a scene that the United States precipitated, with cameras running from multiple angles, showing this gray ship with 100 missiles on it, with an American flag flying, running over and potentially killing this fishing family who's been fishing for decades, for centuries. And then over the horizon from that is a Chinese fleet that's waiting to try to take advantage of that situation. Talk to us a little bit about how you're gaming this, but also more important, the thinking difference, that it's not the kinetic piece of this, but there are so many other complicated other sub-factors that you're having to put into war games that you may not necessarily have had to do, say 10 years ago.
So what you're talking about is pre-hostilities, and so we call that phase zero. We used to call it phase zero, prepping, prepping the environment.
That's right. That's right. For our audience, 0 to 4, which is what the standard was, 4 being after conflict, 3 being conflict, and everything else before, right, is no longer that according to the joint publication 5 or something. They just changed it.
But so this is pre-hostilities, and we have to actually think about those, because those type of issues are exactly the kinds of decision making that has to be done. Now that's at the tactical level. So when I was out there would be briefs on, if this happens, what are the rules of engagement? And the attorney would be there, and they would be saying, this is in self-defense you can do X. Well, if someone says this is hostile, what is hostile intent? What does it look like? Because you always have the inherent right to self-defense. But what you're talking about is a construct that is very difficult to understand unless you have immersed yourself in it. So what does hostile intent look like? And you're in their backyard, and they literally have thousands of ships, what they call the maritime militia, to do exactly that and to take advantage of any missteps that we take. So tactically, there's a lot of lectures, there's a lot of tabletop exercises to immerse people in the experiential learning portion, so that from that perspective, it helps you anticipate moves. And it's almost like a simulator. If you've done something before, you can kind of, you almost have a predetermined response to an action. So that's what we do, right? We do those types of things because we never want to be the country that starts the war. So all the commanders are very well versed and very well briefed in not starting a war. But you always have the inherent right to self-defense. And where does that line? I mean, that's a personal decision.
That's right, and we should say that all of the views you're expressing are your own views. You're not speaking on behalf of the Naval War College, which I should have said at the very top of the discussion. Do you think, Twig, given all the work that you're putting into this, the stepped up, as you said, sort of the stepped up pace, but also the rigor you're trying to apply to it, the increasing use or even more prevalent or predominant use of classified information, deep study before each one of these interactions, do you feel that you're fully gaming out all the potential surprises, right? The War College, it's said that the World War II was won in that room where we talked last at the War College, that had modeled everything out with the exception of the kamikaze, right? And night fighting, right? I think that was another thing that we weren't as good at as maybe we thought. But just about everything else we got pretty right. Talk to us. Do you think that you're up on that curve, given that we're looking at very, very adaptive peer competitors? They want to win without fighting, or at least advance their interest without fighting, and yet they're also building very formidable, particularly in the Chinese case, formidable, as you said, they're trying to build 10-foot-long arms to our 2-foot-long arms, whether it's on the integrated air defense side of the equation, whether it's on the long-range hypersonic precision strike, not just pinpoint, but also be able to deliver mass effects, which is something that is also game-changing, because we have a tendency of thinking of taking a point target out as opposed to taking something bigger out. Do you feel that you're being creative enough to set that list of here are all the potential things that the other guy can do to us, so that we and our allies can better prepare?
Absolutely. Okay, first of all, you have your own capabilities. And when you have a maritime combined arms, air, surface, subsurface, those types of things, we generally learn those disciplines in our stovepipes. And there's a lot of war games that take place at the lower echelon levels. They're tabletop exercises, there's simulations, there's discussions, and that happens in their little vacuum and within their task forces, if you will. This place is the place where everybody comes with all their toys and learns how to integrate with each other. So we're actually learning how to integrate our forces to create synergies together, recognizing where our weaknesses are, okay, trying to come up with ways in order to fix those weaknesses or pick up new ideas in order to fill in for those weaknesses. But we also understand the adversary. Now, we never rest on what the adversary had yesterday or today. We look, we do research, what's out there. We have the best and the brightest, studies, maritime studies institutes, be it, for brand X or brand Y, depending who your adversary is, right? And we actually we use those people to feed us information on what we might be going up against. And so when we bring the commanders in, when we bring the players in, everyone has to learn their role. Think of an orchestra. You might have the best cellist, you may have the best violinist, you may have the best flute player. If they're not all synchronized and playing together, you have noise. And what we do is we take all those independent plans and all those independent instruments of war, and we combine them, and those people have to actually work together in order to achieve specific objectives. Now, we don't always achieve our objectives. Of course not. I mean, that's the nature of the business. And if we don't, we figure out why. And even if you don't, it gives you an understanding of the environment that you didn't have before you got here. And that is priceless, because if you're going to make a mistake with maritime forces, precious maritime forces, and the precious people on those ships, then you want to make those mistakes here. If you're going to learn, you want to learn in an environment that's safe. And I think we're preparing the minds, and that's the thing. We're preparing the minds of the decision makers for the future, not just in executing a plan, but they think differently about their plans. What did it cost me? Was this objective worth what I paid for it? Those are huge things. And then when we feel, and then these leaders move up, and maybe they end up at OpNav, and they're in a position to make a decision about a procurement, something that we're going to buy. That informs their thinking. You can tell a smart person by the answers they give. You can tell a wise person by the questions they ask. What questions are these leaders asking of their subordinates about their plans and how those plans integrate? That's what's done here, and it's not really done very many places. I mean, I think this is about it right here, because we have 100 people in the wargaming department, right? We have secure facilities. Who else has this at the scale we have it?
Talk to me, though, about how you're cooperating with sister services, with allies, in how to make better wargaming, to also take a look not just at the challenges on the naval piece of it, although you play well beyond that, but also to be able to integrate with other elements of national power. Talk to us about what you're doing, even though this is an incredibly unique facility and an incredibly unique capability that does constitute a bit of an 800-pound gorilla. But how are you integrating and working with other folks?
Fantastic question. And what we've realized is we used to focus on air, the physical domains, air, surface, subsurface, and then space, we kind of white-celled. We made certain neutral decisions about space. And so what we've decided is that we can't go it alone. There is no going it alone in certain AORs. You have to understand your own capabilities, and you have to bring in the capabilities of the Air Force, the Marine Corps, the Army, and our plans include that. So what we did is we reached out to Schriever, Air Force Space Command, and we said, hey, we're having a war game. We'd like you to attend. They said, we'd like to attend, and they have subject matter experts that we don't necessarily have in space and in cyber. I just had a meeting with the people who are standing up the new Cyber Command Wargaming facility. I spent all day with them. My faculty spent all day with them 2 days ago. Why? Because cyber, it's not doctrinally, officially a domain, right? I mean, it's a domain inside the information domain, right? That's what they're saying. But is a domain like space? I mean, we have to figure this stuff out. These are key enablers because we have to use everything that we have. So we team up with the Marine Corps. We're teaming up with Schriever. In fact, I'm going to play in their game. I'm going to play in their one of their space games the beginning of June. And we have this relationship that we all know that we're in this together. The last global game, the game that we had, was a TS game, top secret game. And we had the Air Force here. We had the 4-star here with our 4-star admiral. And making decisions about, their understanding, everyone understands their plan, but do they understand their sister's plan? Because they have to be integrated. They have to. Because, example, if my plan requires me to use all my stuff, but part of the bigger plan is that I have to support another entity, now what does that mean? That means I don't have all the stuff I thought I had because I have to give them some stuff. So we are forming relationships with the Air Force, specifically Space Command, Cyber Command, in order to use cyber and space as other key enablers in order to, and AI, we're investigating AI, how does that help us with decisions? I mean, because we have to use everything at our country's disposal if we're going to defend our nation, right? I mean, that's really what we're working on.
And let me ask you one last question. When we were talking both this time and also the last time we were here, that some of the conclusions that the War College has come up with, the wider Navy has not necessarily embraced. So during the interwar period, it was the Naval War College that was looking at naval aviation and how game-changing it was going to be. But in an era of battleship sailors, the aircraft carriers were merely fleet scouts. And then when the war started and the battleship force was damaged or sunk, that's when aircraft carriers happened not to be there, came to the fore and was like, hey, look, we've got this. And there were a whole bunch of folks who said, hey, look, here's the doctrinal information. Talk to us a little bit about the conclusions, how open people are, and you're also challenging certain assumptions. I know that there's a joke that no aircraft carrier has ever been sunk within sight of the Naval War College, especially in a war game. But, talk to us candidly. You're a naval aviator, but your job is also to probe weakness and to also see whether or not, that great era may have passed, right? Talk to us a little bit about the intellectual work that's being done and the receptiveness, more importantly, of the senior Navy leadership to very contrarian things should you guys be like, look, here's the body of evidence. That which we've been doing, as you said, Einstein's, sort of doing the same thing, and you're doing something insane and hoping for a different outcome is the definition of insanity. Talk to us a little bit about that. How receptive are your seniors to the work that you're doing here, even if it is contrary to what all of their assumptions and even programs of record are?
So dissent is good, right? Dissent is good. I mean, you want to argue, not in the sense that emotional, but you want to have an opposing view. I would say that to be very direct about answering your question, that our leadership is very receptive. Especially, remember, we have the 3 and 4 stars playing here, so they're clearly receptive because they're seeing the outcomes of their own decisions. Okay. Now, what you have is you have other entities, maybe at the Pentagon, that have different duties. and they have different ideas about, because they don't know. There's so many things happening. So it's getting the information across domains, from the operational side to the administrative side, and we're doing that, just like I told you, because we're rewriting we're remanaging our reports so that they actually scratch. They provide information for the administrative side as well as the operational side. Now, what you said is no carrier has been sunk in view of the Naval War College. That couldn't be further from the truth, actually. It happens. In fact, people say, why are you letting this happen? It's like, wait a second, this is reality. And so would you trade an aircraft carrier if your objectives are X and an aircraft carrier gets sunk, but you achieve your objectives? If your adversary is back 50 years, would you trade an aircraft carrier for security for 15 years for your kids? I don't want to do that, but that's the reality we live in. And then, of course, then there's all the other argument of, carriers are passé. They're a great risk, and my retort to that is simply, if the carrier's at risk, every other ship's at risk. You say, well, the carrier's a big ship, and it has 5,000 people on it, and that's a bigger loss because it's a capital ship. It's still a loss, and it's an enabler. And again, if the carrier's at risk, so are the countries that you're depending on, whether it's, if you have forces in Guam, Guam's at risk because it is at risk. They can reach you. Everything is at risk. So saying the carrier is at risk connotes a certain kind of, I think, old think, right? Because you have to play the environment with the tools that you have. And that's not to say you can't change it in the future, but if all your land, if you have land within 2,000 miles of the adversary that is all at risk, where are you going to go? They know where the runway is. I'll tell you what, they don't know necessarily where the carrier is because the carrier's moving. Mobility and maneuver, that's very important. You say, well, they're going to look for the aircraft carrier. Well, they already know where all the land bases are. So if you have anything of consequence, if it's a real, if it's a real contested environment, if the fight is on, I would prefer to be mobile and continually hiding from the enemy and complicating his picture. So I think that's old think. I really do. Now, that's not to say the carriers aren't going to change in the future with regard to what we put on them. Maybe they're smaller, maybe they're faster. I don't know. But I can tell you right now that the idea that the carrier's at risk, well, everything's at risk. Bases are at risk. Japan would be at risk. Everything in any AOR is at risk because of the new technologies that are out there that the adversary has.
Twig, LaBranche, sir, thanks very much. It's always a pleasure. Great seeing you again, and love the goatee.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I have a little freedom. Growing this thing actually gave me 10 more IQ points. So it's just like, so I can walk around almost as smart as somebody else.
You're looking and sounding good, sir. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.